So welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with RokoM and Michelle. And this week, we're going to talk about the power of words. And I know we've kind of bounced around on some other stuff and, kind of worked around it. But I'm going to kick us off with a quote, and then we're going to link to another episode that we've done previously too. So this one is, don't ever diminish the power of words. Words move hearts and hearts move limbs. This one stood out for me, and there's another one that I like too, because the words that we say, we're listening to them as well as the people that we're speaking to, right? And if you're talking to yourself, then you're both, right? But those words cause us to take action, or they can cause us to shut down. And the example I'll give you is let's say that you've got 50 plates spinning, which means you have no more capability or bandwidth for anything, and someone comes along and says, hey, can you do X? Fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. You've got two choices you can go to. The first one is, I can't possibly do anything more than what I'm currently doing. The other is to say, how can I do X, right? Which causes us to move toward looking at what we're currently doing, to say, hey, all these 50 plates, are they my plates? Should I even keep them spinning? Mm-hmm. And if they should be kept spinning, am I the one that should be spinning them? So I think when I think about action and moving limbs, I think that's where it starts, is the words that we say either out loud or in our heads. Mm-hmm. They matter.
Yeah. Well, and part of that is because they're attached to some previous experience, which now has formed some perspective or bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious. It's created that bias in your mind. And so the words can actually shift your perspective. It can, like you said, shut you down or open you up. It's that scarcity or abundance, defensive or positive, and I when you were talking about it, I was thinking, when I first started in healthcare, use the word experiment, and people were like, what? Solution? And I was like, well, solution generally means one and done. You never have to go back to it again. But if we have a scientific mindset when we're problem solving, we're talking about experiments or countermeasures to something that already exists. And that was a huge shift for folks to think about, oh, we're coming up with something that we don't know with certainty is going to make a difference, but we're going to test it, versus my idea is the thing to do, and we'll never have to talk about this again. And so it's just those subtleties, but they really do make a difference in how people will perceive what you're actually communicating or expecting.
It's interesting because when you were talking, it brought me back to A3 thinking and teaching in class and the difference. And it's the whole idea of it the thing that came to mind for me is, you say the word pilot, right? We're going to pilot this thing. So all of a sudden it can be directionally correct. It doesn't have to be perfect and totally test out everything, because we're going to experiment, to your point, pilot with it. There's no long-term commitment that I'm doing. And so, yeah, okay, I'll let you do that. I'll be less resistant to that thing because you're going to experiment or pilot with something, versus I'm going to basically drag my feet and dig in because this is not the perfect thing, which it's all in perspective. There's really, it's like standard work or anything else, right? It's the best way that we know how to do it now. And it could be tomorrow, next week, or 2 years from now that we're going to learn a better way. Yeah. But it's not the permanent thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the other piece of it was the why versus the what. The why immediately creates this, oh, I've got to defend my space. Yeah. They're questioning my authority, my decision-making, my thinking, whatever, right? Whereas if you ask that what question, depending on tone, I'll give you, I won't dismiss the tone, but the what at least prompts the other person, okay, they might be interested in what I was actually thinking, as opposed to having to defend my space.
Well, so I'm going to read another quote because there's another thing that came to mind for me too when you were talking. It says, don't talk about what you don't want. Your words are always creating, whether you like their reaction or not. So it's like, put out in the world what you want. Go out there, because I think part of it too, Roko, is if we put out there what we don't want, we may have confirmation bias working in the background to only see that thing that we don't want, because it's not a don't want, do want, it's the thing that you threw out there. So I think that's part of it too, is, are we reinforcing a confirmation bias that we have, that we're just going to keep seeing the stuff that supports those words? So change the words and change your reality.
That's right.
And so I think that's the other piece of it too, is live positive and hopeful, right? Yeah, and it's like the whole glass is half full thing, but there's truth in that, to where if, like, every morning I wake up and I tell myself this is going to be a great day, those words matter to me, right? Because if I woke up in the morning and went, oh my, really already, I got to get up, I'm going to have a completely different mindset to step into the day. I want to step in with possibilities and hope.
That's right.
And I think that's the other piece of words matter, that's not necessarily at work, but it's going to impact.
Yeah. And, you know, and Brene Brown, her latest book, The Atlas of the Heart, and I think she even did like a HBO.
Yeah, I want to see that.
She, you know, she talks about words that are used, you know, synonymously, but they're really not. They're really not. And to her whole point in this book is words do matter. And so choose them wisely. And when you know that they could be used as, you know, have different definitions and are commonly used, make sure you ask, you know, here's how I'm, you know, defining it. What's your definition, so that you at least are on the same page? Because as a leader, or even as, I mean, just anyone in the workspace really, or in your personal life, you could be agreeing to something and have completely different interpretations to what you've agreed to because of those words that are used so commonly, but have many definitions.
Yeah, you assume shared meaning.
Yes.
You assume shared meaning. And so to your point, and I think something you brought up earlier, we all have different experiences. We may have experienced a meaning, an application, if you will, of a certain word, which will stay with us. Versus somebody else and where they're coming at it. The other thing that I'll say on the power of words, and it's the podcast that we did with Paul Stamper on the power of disruption, is when his example, when COVID hit and all this stuff happened, it could have gone into a situation of we can't possibly. But with all the work that the county did, and the channels that they did, it was always about what can we do? What else can we do? What else is available? What can we do with what we have? And those words are powerful for us to go to action in times that we don't necessarily know the path forward. But we're setting ourselves up to explore.
What I love about that statement, Michelle, is embedded in it is this idea that you have the belief that you can get past whatever it is. You may not know how you're going to do it, but you have this belief that there is an ability to survive, to turn it into something positive, to get through it. And I think I just love that about that statement.
Yeah, what comes to mind when you say that is it's the whole below the line, above the line. It takes us from below the line being victim, basically powerless, right? We don't have control, or we have the perception that we don't have control.
Right.
That see it, I'm going to solve it, do it. Above the line, it's like, okay, so what can I do?
Right.
And again, words. What can I do with what I have, with what I know, instead of I can't possibly do anything. What can I do?
Yeah.
What's within my sphere of influence, span of control? You know, what can I step into and do something with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were saying that, it reminded me of this improvement event that we did at a couple of care centers, and it was all about collecting the copays and things like that. And many of the staff members were like, we can't ask them. We just can't ask them. And and so we talked about just subtle shifts in how they were asking. So because they were saying, would you like to pay today? So giving the patient the out, would you like to pay? And some of their patients were like, no, I really don't want to pay today, and when they started changing that to, how would you like to pay today? So they weren't giving the patient an out, but they were giving them options around how they were going to pay. And, it was non-threatening, they didn't feel like they were being pushy or this collection agency, because, even though they were, their role was to collect the co-pays, they saw themselves not as a collector. They really saw themselves as the welcoming person for the clinic. So, but it did change. I mean, it immediately improved their collections just by shifting from would you to how would you, how would you like to?
Yeah, words matter. Words matter. So here's your options.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just think about it. Think about the words that you use and be intentional.
Yes.
About what those are and have an awareness and think about how you feel about it. So anyway, cool stuff. Thanks for chatting. Yeah. So what do you want people to walk away with, RokoM?
I think you just said it. Be intentional. And I know I use this a lot. I love that word intentionality, but there's so much embedded.
That's how we started this whole journey.
There's so much embedded in there. But be thoughtful. I'll use a different word. Be thoughtful about the words that you use. And if they're common words, but don't have necessarily a shared meaning, inquire about the meaning so that you're clear on what if you are.
That's a good call out, not assuming shared meaning, because it happens a lot. And especially with the most common words that we think, oh, you in our heads, we think you must feel the same way about it I do, right? Because this is such a common word. I've heard it forever. Yeah. Don't do that. I think for me, and I'm gonna go back to something on a recent experience around just the power of reflecting, right? And so for me, in the power of words is start observing and paying attention to the words that you say to yourself or the words that you say to others or the words that you're thinking about saying. And then pay attention to how you feel around those words and the subtle shifts, to Roko's point, that we can make in our words, and then pay attention to how you feel with that shift. What impact does that have? Right. And I think that's going to drive home for people, or at least reinforce. There is a lot of power in our words.
Yes.
So that's my ask. So thank you again. I always enjoy hanging out with you. Yeah. So this has been Leadership Soundbites with RokoM and Michele. Please like, share, subscribe, send us topics. We appreciate it. And until next time, have a great one.
Bye-bye.